This presentation today is on how to use REScheck for the 2006 IECC International Energy Conservation Code. And again, my name is Pam Cole from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. A couple of logistics before we get started. At the end of this presentation, we will provide you a link. This link will take you to where you can print out a certificate of completion. You can receive AIA credit, 1.5 learning units. If you're an AIA member, you must take a test and pass that test with 80% or better. We will submit your credit for you to AIA. And attendees can also earn 0.15 CEUs towards renewing their ICC certification. So my suggestion would be print out that certificate of completion for your records. Let's take a look at the overview of the Building Energy Code's residential compliance tools. First off, we have the desktop tool, that's what I'm going to show you today in the demo. This is a Windows version and a Mac version. We also have a web-based tool similar to the desktop version. This is where you can go out and do your projects electronically. You can register with a username and password. You can save your projects. Gives you a little bit more flexibility so you can open these projects down in the building department. You can share them with other clients, electronically. The REScheck package generator is the prescriptive tool. This is the most simplest tool we have. It generates compliance packages that you can choose from. Not a lot of takeoffs are involved, and it's pretty the simplest and easiest, quickest way to get a compliance report. We also have printed materials out there on our website. These are compliance guides and prescriptive tables. However, these only go through the 2003 IECC. An important point to make here is that right now, currently, the 2006 IECC Code Compliance option is only available in the desktop tool. Therefore, if the 2006 is a code that you need to show compliance to and you want to use REScheck, then you need to download the desktop version. The REScheck web and the REScheck package generator, we are currently working on getting the 2006 code option into those tools. So when does REScheck apply? For new construction and additions, you can use REScheck. This is for 1- and 2-family dwellings, or it's for multi-family dwelling units that are 3 or fewer stories in height with 3 or more attached dwelling units. And when also does REScheck apply? Well, not every state-specific code is in REScheck. Not every code is in REScheck. We have all of the IECC codes, and now we have the 2006 is what we're going to talk about today. But what if you don't know what code is applicable in the project in your location? Then you can go out to the status of state codes and click on the state that's applicable to your location, and that page will tell you what their current adopted energy code is, if they do have an energy code. An overview of the residential requirements. In the IECC and other energy codes, you have mandatory requirements and you have climate-specific requirements. This hasn't changed. And how does this affect us today? In REScheck, the mandatory requirements such as moisture control, your vapor retarders, duct insulation service, water heating, those will fall under the inspection checklist. These are not takeoffs that you will enter into the software. Climate-specific requirements that we'll be discussing is your building envelope compliance. This is where, depending on the climate location that you're in, that might have different insulation requirements that are applicable to you, or U-factor requirements dependent. This is your foundations, your crawl spaces, your slabs, your basements, above grade walls, skylights, windows and doors, and your roof area. So when we're talking about climate-specific requirements, this only involves the thermal building envelope. This is your components that are up against outside air or up against an unconditioned space, such as the attic space that is up against an unconditioned space here. That would be a takeoff that would be applicable and would be part of your exterior thermal building envelope. No interior walls, no interior floors. So what is new in REScheck for the 2006 IECC? And we're going to go into some of these. Climate zones have changed. Envelope requirements are different. There are now fenestration hard limits that we'll discuss. New software inputs that are required. Those are part of, there's a new input for conditioned floor area. Solar heat gain coefficient inputs are now required. And in the 2006 IECC and IRC is a panel certificate that is now required that I will show you. Different approach to HVAC tradeoffs is also new for the 2006 code option in REScheck. the climate zones. These are in the 2006 IECC and implemented in a REScheck. There was 19 climate zones. They have been reduced down to 8. One of the main reasons for these new climate zones is so jurisdictions have one set of requirements. And an important note to make here is that the climate zones, is if in one climate zone, all the locations within that zone all have the same requirements for that entire zone. And as you see Climate Zone 5 here, which goes across much of the U.S., then Climate Zone 5, that entire climate zone across the U.S., the same requirements are applicable. Now there are two main tables in the 2006 IECC that we need to discuss here. The first one is the 402.1.1. This is the insulation and fenestration requirements by component. And a couple things to note on this is one important change. In the 2006, percentage of glazing is not a requirement to determine what your requirements are. It is the climate zone that you will first go to determine what are these requirements for insulation and fenestration that are applicable to your climate location. Also, under wood frame walls, there's a 19 and a 13 plus 5 here. What does that mean? The 2006 allows 19 to be compressed into a 2x6 wall. 13 plus 5, the footnote defines 13 as the cavity insulation, and the 5 also is the insulated sheathing that would be required. So if you're in Climate Zone 5 and you're not installing an R19 into the 2x6 wall, then you need to meet the 13 plus an additional insulated sheathing of an R5 to meet that requirement for this table. Over on the basement wall, R values. What does the 10 and 13 mean? The first value there is the continuous insulation value. So the continuous insulation value, what that means is this is typically rigid foam board with no thermal breaks. The next value there that shows 13, that's the cavity insulation value. Now this is an either or. Either you are going to install rigid foam board of up to an R10, or you're going to do a cavity insulation of an R13 in that basement wall to meet the requirement. And that would be applicable depending on your location there, of course. Under slab, another footnote here is if you have a heated slab and then you're in a climate zone that would require insulation, such as the R10 2 feet, if you have a heated slab, then the code requires that you have an additional R5 added to that slab edge. Again, the crawl space wall R values, the 10 and the 13, they're the same as the definition for a basement wall. The first value is continuous, the second value is cavity. The second table in the 2006 IECC and what is in REScheck is the U factor table. Another point to make here is that REScheck uses the U factor table. This is for the entire assembly component, for that individual component. The other table was your insulation values only. So when you're looking at the other table, you're looking at R values of insulation for the particular component. This one is the U factor of the entire component. Also, what's still applicable that's not in this equivalent U factor table is your solar heat gain coefficient requirements. They still need to be met depending on your climate location, and those fall under the other table that's the R value table, as I shall call it. Now in the 2006 IECC there are compliance paths and there is the REScheck approach, and to get a better idea of how REScheck works and the compliance paths that are available in the 2006, I've defined them here. In the 2006 there are two main paths. There's the prescriptive path, and underneath that prescriptive path there are some subpaths. I showed you the R value computation. I showed you the R value table. There's also the U factor alternative, which was just the previous table I showed you. And there's also the total UA, U factor times area. Now the U factor alternative is for individual components. The total UA is for all your exterior thermal building envelope components based upon UA for the entire building envelope. And also in the 2006 IECC is performance. This is a simulated performance alternative that's available in the 2006 IECC. It's the other main path.
Now, how does REScheck handle these?
REScheck hasn't changed. it's still a total UA alternative approach. So it's taking the U factor table that I showed you, but it is doing an overall total UA calculation and compliance. This allows trade-offs across your building envelope components, where you can increase values somewhere, decrease values anotherwhere, but the overall UA must meet the maximum UA from the tables in the U factor equivalent U factor table. Now, also REScheck has now a limited scope performance analysis for HVAC trade-offs. Now, a couple of things that are in the 2006 that I will be discussing are some building envelope components and how REScheck is handling some of these new requirements. For fenestration, the 2006 says, now fenestration, first off, it includes opaque doors. So in the 2006, when you hear the word fenestration, it is not just glass, it includes doors as well. In your colder climates, you have both a prescriptive maximum U factor and there are hard limits, so to speak. The code allows an area weighted average for your fenestration, meaning there's a U factor and solar heat gain requirement. You can take an area weighted average, but both of those, depending on your climate zone, are subject to hard limits even in the trade-off approach. So they cannot be traded off past this hard limit, and we'll discuss those. Also in the 2006, and this hasn't really changed, is that your products, NFRC rated and certified. If they are not, there is a default table that you can go to and use if you do not have an NFRC label product that you are installing in your home. However, a point to make here is that you have some limitations to this default table depending. You can meet it in climate zone 1 if you have single pane. You can meet the defaults that would be applicable, and when I say meet, I mean that you're meeting the prescriptive U factor requirements in the 2 tables that I showed you. So in climate zone 2 and 3, those double pane default values will meet the prescriptive, or I should say the equivalent U factor table as well.
If you are in a different climate zone, those default values in the tables will not meet code.
Also in the code, there are some exemptions. You have 15 square feet of glazing that can be exempted. This is a so-called an allowance. If you have decorative glass near your front door, then that 15 square feet would be exempted from your requirements to have to meet that table. The same applies to 1 opaque door can also be exempted in your project. Now, how does REScheck handle the fenestration requirements? REScheck does calculate an area weighted average, so the U factor and solar heat gain that are subject to these hard limits are calculated in REScheck. And I'm going to show you how you can look at this and not have to go to your code book to see where these requirements are if they're applicable in your location. REScheck also provides this credit of the 15 square feet. Now how this works is you will enter all your fenestration. REScheck will look at the highest glazing U factor and exempt up to 15 square feet of it. The same applies to the door. You will enter all your exterior doors and the applicable U factor for all of your doors. REScheck will look at the poorest U factor and exempt that one door from your compliance UA. Another point to make here is that, as I mentioned before, this is for new construction and additions. Window replacements cannot be shown when using REScheck. I've talked about these hard limits, and you're probably wondering, what are these hard limits? So I can be aware of them. If I can't trade off to them, I want to know what they are, and we actually will have them in REScheck to make it easier for you to see what they are if it's applicable to your location. So these that are designated by climate zone and are in REScheck. In zones 4 and 5, you cannot exceed a 0.0, or I should say a 0.48. That is your maximum. Now these are trade-offs. You're going to have to trade off somewhere else in your building envelope to even get to this trade-off approach. So these are trade-off limits. The maximum in zones 6 and 8 is a 0.40, and then there are skylight maximums of a 0.75 in zones 4 and 8. Again, these are based on a building average. So if you had one window that was a worst-case scenario, then you might meet these trade-off limits. And the easiest way to show you is when we do the demo in REScheck so you can understand what I'm talking about. The solar heat gain coefficient. Again, in the 2006 and in REScheck, you have a prescriptive requirement in your climate zones 1 through 3. You can do an area weighted average, but what you're looking at is a 0.40 or lower, which is required in climate zones 1 through 3. The mandatory requirement, the hard trade-off limit, and this is in the performance path trade-offs, you cannot exceed a 0.50 in climate zones 1 through 3. Now, I talked about the default tables for the U factors for your windows in climate zones 1 through 3. Well, here's another one for you to keep note of, is that the default values for the solar heat gain coefficients, well, they cannot be used to meet the requirements here in climate zones 1 through 3. So the default values will not help you for areas if you're in climate zones 1 through 3. Some more components. Let's take a look at ceilings. There's some new special case allowances in the 2006 and in REScheck. Cathedral ceilings or ceilings with no attics. Now, if you have a ceiling where you're in an area where your insulation levels may require higher than an R30, and you cannot achieve the R30 in a cathedral ceiling, the code allows, and REScheck does calculate, the first 500 square feet, the lower reduced requirements of an R30. So the code allows 500 square feet to be based on the lower requirement of R30.
All square footage over 500 is based on the higher requirement.
Now the raised energy trust, raised or energy trust, 2006 and REScheck. The same thing, kind of the same thing here, is that if you can achieve full insulation to the full height over the exterior wall, and the code is requiring a higher R value of an R38, you can substitute that with an R30. The same applies if it was requiring an R49. You can substitute that with an R38, and you will not be penalized in the software. Above grade walls. The important point to make is include your rim joists. If you have more than one story of walls, you want to include your rim joist in that calculation and enter it in your takeoffs in REScheck. It's required to be insulated, and a quick overview of the actual insulation values down here in the right-hand corner based upon climate zone R19, 13 plus 5 that I talked about in your climate zones 4, 5, and 8. Floors over unconditioned space. This could be over an unconditioned basement. This could be over an unconditioned crawl or outside air. And again, the quick and easy is these are the insulation values now that I've defined them here based upon the climate zone. And I have A, B, and C, and you're probably wondering, what do those mean? A is humid, B is dry, and C is marine. These come from the climate zones. And so I've designated them just as they show actually in the code. And those are the minimum R values from the R value table. If you don't meet these, and you're doing your takeoffs in REScheck, then again, what REScheck is a trade-off approach. You need to compensate for not meeting the minimums and increase levels of insulation somewhere else in your exterior thermal building envelope when you're doing your takeoffs. Below grade walls. Below grade wall, or we call them basement walls, is defined as a wall that is greater than or at 50% or greater than below grade. So if you have a basement wall or a wall that is more than 50% below grade, then it would be defined as a below grade wall in the code. Again, the quick and easy is the insulation values based upon climate zone. But keep in mind there are some things that are new that I'm going to show you for below grade walls. And I'll get to those when I show you some REScheck. Compliance and documentation. Not a lot has changed here. The code official always has the final authority. Electronic media can be used to submit your reports. REScheck has the ability to do that. You can submit your reports electronically right from within the tools if you would like to, and the building department accepts that method of showing your reports. That they'll allow you to submit a PDF or so forth electronically. And construction work, of course, if it requires a permit, it is subject to inspection, and hopefully the buildings out there are being inspected. What is new? Certificate is required. When I showed you the slide of what's new in REScheck, one of the items was panel certificate. And we've implemented this into REScheck. This panel certificate, the code requires some certain information beyond this panel certificate. R values of insulation that are installed and the exterior thermal building envelope should be shown on this certificate. The U factors of your fenestration, the solar heat gain coefficient, your HVAC efficiencies, and service water heating. And where is this certificate supposed to be installed? On the electrical distribution panel. These are the requirements come in the 2006, and this certificate is an option to be printed within REScheck. And last, what is new in REScheck is the HVAC tradeoffs. First off, REScheck works the same as if your building envelope passes by UA compliance. That has not changed in REScheck. However, if your house fails by UA compliance and you have entered a high-efficiency HVAC equipment, then there are some new things that do happen. REScheck will calculate a limited scope performance analysis. It will run in a limited scope performance analysis, which is permitted under Section 404.6.2 in the 2006 IECC. This requires the user to initiate a compliance check and requires entries of orientation. You need to do orientation of your building envelope. You have to have the solar heat gain coefficients entered. And keep in mind, by doing the limited scope performance analysis, this doesn't always improve compliance even if you have high efficiency HVAC specified. Now I'm going to show you a series of screenshots that are new to REScheck, and then we'll get into doing the live demonstration. This is a screenshot of REScheck. Nothing has changed, still looks the same, but when you upload the desktop version for the first time, you will see a loading bar that will come across the screen. And the first time you load REScheck, it might take you a little bit to get it loaded onto your desktop. The first screen. There's three main screens to REScheck. Now, some of this might not be new to you, so some of this is basic information, and some of this is some new information and some new inputs that are in REScheck that are only applicable to the 2006. Project envelope mechanical are your three main screens. Location is where you will designate where the project is located, state and city. Your building characteristics, which is the 1 and 2 family and multifamily. But there are some new inputs on the project tab. Conditioned floor area. I've mentioned this. The conditioned floor area is the calculation of every conditioned floor in your project. So let's say you have a 3-story house that includes a basement, and the basement's finished, it's conditioned. And let's say it's a small house that's 500 square feet. Then you're adding up every floor. 1,500 square feet would be your entry for that conditioned floor area. The solar heat gain coefficient. This might be something that is new to some users and maybe not to others, because this did appear in projects that where they were on the 2003 IECC, let's say, but they were in a location that was designated with the mandatory requirement of a 0.4 or less, which was actually 3,500 heating degree days or less. They would see these too, maximum SHGC and the your SHGC. Now they will show up all the time when you're on the 2006 IECC for compliance in REScheck. The envelope section. The blue and white buttons, skylight, ceiling, walls, windows. Nothing has changed as far as REScheck in doing your takeoffs. You will define your exterior building envelope. You will choose the applicable component from the drop-down assembly choices. If one of those assembly choices matches your construction, you choose it. You're going to enter the square footage of that component and what you're insulating that component to. And REScheck is going to calculate the U factor and UA of that component for you. Below grade walls. These are some screenshots of some components in the software that require more inputs. Below grade walls is one of them. If you have the below grade wall based upon the definition that I gave you, then you're going to get another screen that comes up and say, well, what's the wall height? What's the depth below grade? And what is your depth of insulation? Now, I showed you the U factor, the equivalent U factor table in the beginning, and that is what REScheck uses for the 2006. For below grade walls, the U factor table assumes full height of insulation on your below grade walls. Users are still allowed to enter their depth of insulation that can be less than full height of the wall. However, when you do that and you're not insulating that entire wall, you're already below the minimums from the U-factor equivalent table, and you're going to have to make up for it somewhere else in your building envelope. So now you are doing some trade-offs and compensating and doing something else somewhere else to make up for not doing full height insulation there. Crawl space walls. Again, you're going to get another screen that comes up, and it's going to ask you the wall height, the depth below grade, the outside depth below grade, your depth of insulation, and the depth of the inside grade. And keep in mind, the equivalent U-factor table is used for your crawl space walls. When is crawl space walls equivalent, or when is it applicable to you? Crawl space walls will only need to be defined in REScheck if it's a conditioned crawl space and it's being mechanically ventilated. And if that is the case, then the floor above the crawl would not be an input for your project, because that floor above the crawl would be a interior floor in between two conditioned spaces. So it would not be a takeoff in the software. And lastly, the slabs. Again, you get another screen that comes up, and it wants to know, well, how are you insulating your slab, and what is the insulation in feet? Slab is the only input in the software that is in linear feet. So you're only calculating up the linear exposed edge of the slab that's applicable to your thermal building envelope of the project. Mechanical requirements in REScheck. The inputs are still the same. You can do the calculation. The limited scope performance analysis will take place for the 2006 if you have a high efficiency HVAC equipment installed and you're failing UA compliance. But this is optional. You don't have to show your HVAC equipment at all to meet your building envelope and get a certificate of compliance for your building envelope to meet the 2006 IECC. Now, what if you have questions in the software? The entire software user's guide is embedded in the help that is in the software. If you go to the help menu and you click on help topics, things that are applicable to 2006, definitions that might be new in the 2006, they're all embedded in the software's user's guide. So the first place, the quickest place to go if you have questions on how to do an input, what a definition is, go to the software user's guide in the software. Now let's take a look and let's go over to the actual demo and let's play around with the software so we can see some of these new things that are happening with the 2006. And it might take a minute here for it to come up. And I'm in the software, and this is habit for me. And if you're an avid REScheck user, it probably is habit for you. But the first thing I always look at is up at the very top in the blue bar. What code is defaulted here? This tells you the actual version number of the software, and this is desktop. It'll tell you the title of your data file. I don't have a data file. I just opened it, so I haven't even opened anything, so it says untitled. The .rck is actually the extension file name of that data file. So when I talk about codes, I've just clicked on the code menu. What I didn't show you is the first time you open up REScheck, you're actually going to see a screen that appears, and it's going to say, do you know what your code is? And if you don't, it has a little link that will take you out to our website to the status of state codes, and you can click off that so it doesn't appear every time. I've done that so you didn't see it. But what if then you are now doing a project in another location, and you're looking at these codes and you're not sure? Down at the very bottom, info, find your code. You can click on that if you're not sure. And you have to be connected to the internet, and it'll take you out to that page that I keep talking about, the status of state codes. You'll click on the state, the location of the project, and then it'll tell you what the current status is of their energy codes that are adopted for residential and commercial, and whether you can use the REScheck, and on the commercial side it's actually ComCheck. So that will tell you whether you can even use these tools, because not every state is in here. And a good example is, of course, if you're familiar, California has their own state-specific code. That code's not in this software. They got to use their own software application. So let's take a look at these. Some of these things are actually, that I'm going to show you, have been new to the software within this last year. And then I'll show you things that are completely new with 2006. So I'm going to be showing you a couple of different things here. So in the Project tab, I talked about the location where you can change your city and your state. Building characteristic, here's that condition floor area that you need to enter. This is where you enter it. If you haven't, believe me, it's going to tell you that it needs it. and we'll play around with a data file that I have. I have a couple data files that we're going to play around with. But down in the left-hand corner, beyond the code, this is where you can actually go out to these sites, Energy Star, Building America, and the Resource Center. The Resource Center is actually a resource center that's on the Building Energy Codes website that you can go into. Pull graphics, look at code notes. There's just an abundance of information in that Resource Center that you can go to. These are links that will take you out there. But over here in the project details, you'll see that under owner agent, I have my name. Yeah, I'm the owner. And designer contractor. Well, this is where anything that you have in this side of the software is what's going to show up on your compliance report. So I clicked on the edit project details, and there's 3 new tabs: title site permit, owner agent, designer contractor, and this is where I'm going to customize what I want on this report. If I have additional notes that I want to make sure they are aware of dealing with this project, I'm going to enter them down in the notes. Over an owner agent, and I've already populated this, I've put my name. I can put more information there if I want to. And then the designer contractor, you can put all that information so you can clearly have for the plan reviewer or whoever's looking at this report everything they need that would be applicable to this project. But what if you're a builder that's running lots of RESchecks and you're really getting tired of putting your owner name and your designer contractor in there every time you run a report? Well, actually, this has been when we get feedback, and this is why we love feedback from all of our users. What will help you with REScheck? Because we look at all of these, and we made an enhancement to REScheck, where now if you come up to the Edit and Preferences, I can actually default and define, so every time I open up REScheck, it's going to do some new things for me. This makes it simpler for me if I'm a builder that's doing a bunch of these REScheck runs. First off, there's 4 new tabs: General, Project, Applicant, and Reports. Under General, if I want to default to a certain place on my desktop where I save all my data files, I can do it right here. So I can default to where my file locations are for all my data files. If I want to, I can turn off that Beyond Code Advisor that I showed you. So that's optional too if you don't want to continue to see that. In the Project tab, I know that I'm only going to be working in one state that has one code, and I want to make sure every time I open up REScheck it shows that code and that location. You can default it here, and every time you open up REScheck, it's going to have that location for you, so I don't have to even enter that anymore. Also under Envelope, if you want to enable orientation so it's there, and I will show you because that actually to enable it in some cases it comes from a different menu, your overhang projection factors, or any comments. There's an actual other column that you can add to your envelope components. If you had additional details, you had a unique wall system, and you want to make sure you give as much detail as you can for when that plan reviewer is looking at your reports, you can enable that column from here, where it's there all the time. Under Applicant, and this is where it's already populated for me because I've entered this information, but I don't want to keep entering it every time I do a report. So it's in here. Your designer contractor, it's in here. I don't have to type this every time I'm in REScheck. But here, I love this feature the best, and I've had a lot of users who are really happy because we've had requests way back, and now we've actually made it an enhancement in the tool, is that you can customize your signature line. You can say who you are, and if you have more than one person signing these compliance reports, you can add additional lines. If I want to add a line, I can add another person here to that signature line. Another nice feature is, not real new, but this preference is new, is that if you're emailing your reports and you don't want to keep entering your email address and your name, it'll default it here. So that way this is just repetitive information that you don't need to do anymore if you put it into the preferences. So also, let's go down to the bottom of REScheck, compliance. Down at the bottom, right-hand side, or left-hand side, don't know my right from left. It says no envelope assembly specified. It's in blue. First thing is, anything in blue, that kind of means it's good. If it's in red, red's bad. It's looking for information. And it'll come up in red if it needs something. And if something's in red, REScheck can't calculate any compliance for you if it's needing something. So always look for something in red. And that's one true sign that you're not going to get a calculation until it has an entry. The max UA and your UA, same as it's always been. Max UA comes from the baseline of the code. Your UA is your proposed UA, which is U factor times area of your entire building envelope that you've entered into REScheck. TBD, to be determined. We don't have anything in this. I haven't even opened up a data file yet, so I don't have any compliance and that maximum SHGC and your SHGC. Again, it'll say NA down there if you're in a climate zone where it's not required, but even though you don't have requirements for it, you still have to enter it. In the envelope, I said there would be a new column. There is. That's the solar heat gate coefficient. That's a new column that you will always see if you're on the 2006, and that value needs to be entered. And just a brief overview. How you run your takeoffs, you choose from the component up above or the assembly up above, and now you're going to actually choose from one of the drop-down lists if it matches your construction type. And now what's relatively new in the REScheck is, what if I'm on ceiling and, oh, I got some more information. I can go out and look. If I'm on the internet, if I'm connected, maybe I want to look at some insulation options. Well, these are links that will take you right to additional information that might help you with your project while you're running your takeoffs. If I was to click on the flat ceiling, now this is a question that comes into the help desk a bit, so I'm just going to go over just a couple things that are REScheck 101. You would still enter your square footage like you do for all your components except for slab, that's in linear feet. But let's say that I'm putting in an R38 in my ceiling. Now I know I got so many odd inches above the trusses, and I know there's no thermal break. I've had users that have separated out that R value and put some of it in cavity and some of it in continuous. You do not do that. The software is actually running a series of calculations. If it's one application of insulation, that 38 will go under cavity. The only time you're going to do continuous is if you had, for a ceiling that is, rigid foam board above the roof deck is when you would do it. And then again, if you had a wall, this is where you'd put your insulated sheathing. This is continuous with no thermal breaks. So again, keep that in mind when you're running your takeoffs. You wouldn't double up your insulation values there as well, because if you did 38 and 38, then you just made yourself a nice ceiling that, I don't know how you'd fit that much in there, but it's taken both values to calculate that overall UA. Honey, I won't play with mechanical too much, except for down at the bottom is, with that beyond code, is some more additional information that might help you. Maybe you want to go out to learn how I size my HVAC systems correctly, or more information on duct leakage testing. These are additional links to help users to get them to other places for additional information when they're running their takeoffs. So let's open up the first data file, because I have two of them to show you. And now, this first data file that I'm opening, I'm saying no, I'm not going to save this that I've been playing around with, is several questions that have came in. Is, okay, I'm in a state that had the 2003 IECC, so this project actually was a 2003 IECC project. And they just adopted the 2006, so I thought I could come in and change this project so I could submit my report to the 2006, and I'm having some problems. I got some questions. Well, let's see what happens when you change to the 2006. First off, this climate zone in Utah is climate zone 5. And I'll be telling you a couple of maximum U factors and some minimum insulation values that come from those tables while I'm looking at this project with you. Right now in 2003, down at the bottom, compliance says it passes, green is good. Nothing's in red. Max UA, your UA, and percentage better than code 5.1. Let's go over to the actual envelope where the takeoffs are. We have ceiling, walls, and floors. Okay. Let's just change it to the 2006 and see what happens. Now, I talked to you about some required inputs, and I talked to you about things that might come up in red. And as you're looking at the envelope, I see stuff that's in red, but then I play with REScheck a lot. So solar heat gain is that new column. It requires you to enter the solar heat gain coefficient. That's one. Down at the bottom, it's telling you, first off, invalid condition floor area. Now, if you're in the envelope tab, that probably could be a little confusing, because if you're a first-time user, you're going, well, what? I got my floor in there. What does that mean? Well, that's over in the project tab. Now I have to enter my condition floor area, so I'm entering 1,200 square feet. Now I'll come back over to envelope. Oh, that condition floor area invalid, and it went away, but now I got something else, and it's that invalid solar heat gain coefficient. It's needing that. So let me go up there and put a solar heat gain coefficient in there. Oh, that helped me. Now it's saying check compliance. Remember when I talked to you about that check compliance? How it needs to initiate that when it has all the inputs that it needs for right now. Now it's saying, okay, I'll calculate. But let's take a look here. The max UA is 343. Your UA is 410. On this project, that means I'm higher than the max. I'm probably not going to meet code at this point. So when I check compliance, and let's just do that, What is it telling me? It's telling me the compliance fails, which I probably already knew that from my proposed UA was higher than the max. It's telling me my percentage worse than code. And down here, and this is important to take note because the compliance changes depending on a couple things, and you'll see this in another data file. Compliance right now is based on UA. This building envelope is failing compliance by the overall thermal building envelope, U factor times area. That's what it's failing. Why is it failing? That's another question that comes in. It was passing nicely in the 2003. We have a series of FAQs that we put on our website on this, but again, this can all depend on your project and your location, but let's take a look at this project real quickly. Now, for the ceiling, in Climate Zone 5, the minimum is an R38. We're not meeting it there. We're going to have to trade off somewhere else. The wall, Climate Zone 5 would call out an R19 or a 13 plus at an additional insulated sheathing of an R5. We're not meeting it there. We can't do any trade-offs right now yet. We're not even meeting the minimums. Let's take a look at the windows. U factor is a 0.40. The maximum U factor is a 0.35. We're not meeting it there, so we can't even start trading off to that hard limit. And there is a hard limit to trade off up to in this climate zone. We're not meeting, we can't even do that yet, so because we're not trading anything off, right? So down here at the floor, this is the only component that's actually meeting the minimum for this climate zone, which is an R30. Another important point to make here is always come over to the UA column when you're looking at issues and you're wanting to go, where is my biggest hitter? What's the problem? Because it could be, there could be all different situations depending on your project. Just happens to be with this one is failing for a couple of reasons. The biggest is this 177. These walls are not getting into compliance very easily here, and this is really hurting this project. Now, let's say that, okay, I don't want to do anything with this project. I want to leave it as is. And I know I'm putting in some high-efficiency equipment. Can I see if that'll help me with this project? Well, yeah, you can, because it's failing by UA. Let's go over here. Let's put in a furnace and put it at 90. Now, again, always look down. Under compliance, it's saying building orientation. Front faces not specified. TBD over in the percentage. Why is it not calculating? That other required input that I told you about, if you're going to have the software run a limited scope performance analysis on your HVAC, if you have a high piece of equipment that you're putting in there, is you have to have orientation specified. Now you'll see another input box up at the top. It says front faces. It says unspecified. Well, how do I specify it? Actually, how you do that is pretend you're standing in the house facing the front door, and that's how you're going to orient the front faces. So let's just say it's north. Now down in your project, you have a new column. It's orientation, and it's saying unspecified. Well, let me just change this to front. Okay, well, why don't I have compliance? And you don't. If you look down in the compliance bar, it's saying more than one orientation must be specified. That means REScheck still cannot run compliance for you based upon the HVAC performance analysis that it does. It has to have at least 2 walls specified. But I highly suggest if you're going to go this route, I'd be doing every wall and orienting every wall and putting the applicable windows and doors within that wall under that wall. So we don't spend time orienting this project. Let's go look at one that is. Okay, now I'm opening up a different project. This one already, now it's on the 2006 at the top. This is the code that's chosen. This has all the orientation done. This has the solar heat gain coefficient in there. I'm looking pretty good. I don't see anything in red. Let's go over to project. And it's not telling me down below that I didn't have my conditioned floor area, but I'll keep repeating it, is that, yep, it's in there. I got my conditioned floor area. Now, I can come down here and check compliance. I'm looking at my UA, though, and I know that I'm a little higher than the max UA. So let's take a look at this project. And let me check compliance first so we can see that now it's failing based upon UA only. And I'm failing by a little bit margin, 4.3. Let's take a look at some of these insulation values. I have changed, just to try to confuse you a little bit, I've changed this project. And then the last one, if you were paying attention real closely, it was in the state of Utah. Now I've changed it to a different state. This location is in climate zone 6. So off memory, I'll pull out to you from those two tables again some minimum requirements. So let's take a look at this project. Why would I be failing? What can I do? Maybe I don't even want to deal with mechanical. Can I just deal with UA compliance right here and be done? Yeah, you can. And then you can submit your report. That's always the fastest way to do it anyway. So let's take a look at some of these insulation values. I have that flat ceiling, and in this climate zone, R49 is specified. But I got that cathedral or ceiling with no attic. It's 300 square feet, and that allowance that's in the code, that first 500 can be that minimum of R30, the lesser insulation requirement. REScheck does not penalize you to do this for 500 square feet of it. So that value is fine. That's the minimum. You're not getting any trade-offs. So right now we're meeting minimums on our insulation. The walls are R19, and this climate zone, that's what the insulation value calls for. So we're meeting the walls nicely. So let's go down past these walls and let's go to the floor. The floor is meeting it as well. I'm not really upgrading anything anywhere. So why am I not meeting code? If I am meeting the minimums, why am I not meeting code? And this is when I talk to you about different projects. Every project's different. You got to look at each one individually to really define what really is going on, why one isn't meeting it, why one is. And on this one, I mentioned those hard limits. I mentioned the trade-offs. In certain climate zones, you can go up to this hard limit if you're trading off. But first, REScheck looks at that maximum U factor from the equivalent U factor table, and that's what it's using. So let's take a look at these windows in here. I'll click on one so it's highlighted so you can see that 0.40. And all of them are 0.40. I don't really need to talk about solar heat gain coefficient too much because it's in a climate zone where there is no mandatory requirement for a minimum solar heat gain, but that is still a required input. Now, this U factor of 0.40, well, what's that hard limit? What if you don't have the code book? I had mentioned before that REScheck actually will show you this, and it's a new screen. I can come up to View and click on Proposed and Maximum U Factors. REScheck is already calculating the area weighted average, and it's telling you, well, this is what you've proposed, and you have proposed 0.40 across the board, so that's my area weighted average, right? The solar heat gain, same thing. It's telling me what it is, but it's not applicable. I don't really have a mandatory requirement or a requirement there for it, but it is an input that's required. Maximum allowed. Now, this 0.40, and you look at it and you're going, well, I meet it, so how come I'm not meeting code? Really on this project, I want to bring this point up is that, and our help desk is more than willing to help people that do have a data file that would like, that need more information, that are stuck and need an understanding. Send us in that data file through our help desk. Send an inquiry through the help desk or an email, and believe me, we want to make sure that everyone understands everything that goes on with REScheck. So let's talk about this. What this means here is that I'm not meeting that maximum 0.35. I'm not beefing up anything else in this building envelope, so I'm not trading anything off. I'm meeting minimums here. You have to start trading off components in your building envelope before you can start trading off another component, and it would be this component is the glazing. So since there is nothing that's being increased anywhere, this is why this project's not meeting it. Now let's look at this. Well, this one looks great, right? The insulation levels are good. What if there's nothing you can do with this project and they are installing high-efficiency equipment? Well, let's go put some equipment in. I'll put the same thing I did in the last case study, and I'll put 90 AFUE. And now down at the bottom, it's saying check compliance. I'm going to click the check compliance button. It's going to think about it for a minute. And with this project, I have received a bit of credit towards my building envelope based upon the location and everything else, and it has ran this performance analysis, this limited scope performance analysis, and I'm meeting code. Down here at the bottom, compliance based on equipment performance. When it does meet compliance, when you've put in high-efficiency equipment, this will be displayed. You are not showing compliance when you're by compliance by UA anymore, and this will show up on your reports. Now let's go take a look at one of the reports. I'll give it a few minutes in case it doesn't come up as fast as it does for me. This report was generated from that project I just talked about. Climate Zone 6, glazing of 14. And now the green bar, if you can see it, says passes on equipment performance. Now another important point that I don't think I made is also on that 2003 project that I showed you, and this has been a question. I'm going to bring back the software and just quickly tell you this. I'm going to open up that software again to show you this other point that I really wanted to make. Is this project that passed in the 2003 nicely at 5.1, and when I changed it to the 2006, I didn't make this point, so I just want to clarify this with you, even though I entered everything. Another reason why this one wasn't meeting code, not only was it not meeting the minimum insulation values, but it was also that the percentage of glazing on this project was, I believe, at 8%. And in the 2003, your stringency was based on glazing. So your lower your glazing percentage, less amount of insulation was required in your projects. 2006, glazing percentage and window-to-wall ratio is gone. And so therefore, in some climate locations, your stringency could be more. It could be increased. And for this one, it is. If you had glazing in the 2003 that was higher than 15, 15 is typically the baseline back in the 2003 as far as the compliance for window-to-wall ratio. Let's say if it was at 18 or 20 in the 2003, well, believe me, stringency was increased when you were trying to show compliance for that higher glazing in the 2003. And most likely, bringing in a project to the 2006 that had a high amount of glazing, such as that, probably was meeting code in the 2006 because your stringency had increased significantly for that higher amount of glazing. So again, we've actually made an FAQ that kind of explains this. So here's just one more point to make, that depending on your project, there could be a couple scenarios going on, especially if you're moving into the 2006 and you've had an older code. You got to look at that there's no percentage of glazing anymore. You got to go to those tables and look at the minimum insulation values or the equivalent U factor table. The U factor table is somewhat harder for your builder or whatever to go look at because that's a calculated U factor for the entire assembly. So the easier one is that insulation table, and we have that in the Resource Center. That table's there for you to go pull and keep it with you if you want a little cheat sheet. The other thing is the hard limit trade-offs. Well, you can't go to those unless you're trading off somewhere else in your building envelope. So just a couple issues that you need to keep in mind when you're moving into the 2006 that might affect you. And most importantly is the REScheck now has new inputs that are required that these other codes did not. So those are things that will show up in red, and you got to be looking for those to make sure that you're entering everything that shows down here on that compliance bar. So this is just a very quick demo of some of the new things in the 2006 in REScheck. And if you have questions or if you want more information, first I highly suggest if you are not registered for the Setting the Standard newsletters, go out and do so. Register for that newsletter. We send that out. We try to at least send that out 4 times a year. We send it out electronically, and we also have a hard copy that gets distributed. And we put in builder information, code notes, applicable things that are happening out in the field that might need some more information to help the builders that are out there in the field and inspectors and so forth. Out on our website, energycodes.gov, U.S. Department of Energy's Building Energy Codes program, is where you can download the desktop version, which is the only tool right now that shows compliance to the 2006. And it's out there on the main page under free software. You can download REScheck right from there. And the other tools that are available, and technical support if you have questions. And that ends how to use REScheck on the 2006 IECC code option that's in REScheck now. If you have questions and comments, again, send them through the Help Desk online form or email them. And we thank you for attending today. And this is brought to you from U.S. Department of Energy's Building Energy Codes program.